again, you're watching Gravitas. All along India's periphery, the Chinese presence is ubiquitous. Pakistan is China's iron brother, recipient of Chinese weapons, including of the nuclear variety, and increasingly a destination for $45 billion of promised Chinese investment in ports and infrastructure as part of the ambitious One Belt, One Road initiative. Sri Lanka is another link in this chain. The presence of China's Defence Minister Chang Wang-kwan in Colombo today is a reminder of how Beijing is chipping away at India's position in this region. Nepal will be the Chinese Defence Minister's next port of call, and India is bracing for a concerted effort by Beijing to build its presence on India's eastern doorstep. Right, so let's take a look at the implications of the visit of China's Defence Minister to Colombo and Kathmandu. Here is General Chang Wang-kwan meeting the Lankan President Maithripal Sirisena. China was a generous supplier of military equipment, reportedly at least $1 billion worth, if not more, during Colombo's war against the Tamil Tigers. And since that war ended in 2009 with the Tigers' defeat, China has expanded its influence. China's iron hold over Sri Lanka has grown. It has provided huge loans to help Sri Lanka rebuild destroyed infrastructure. Major projects include the Matala International Airport and the Hambantota Deep Sea Port. Add to this China's biggest FDI to date in the Colombo port. Since 2014, Chinese nuclear submarines have docked in Colombo, much to India's discomfort. Current reports say that Chinese firms may take ownership of the airport since Colombo cannot pay for it. And joining us this evening on Gravitas, Padma Rao, senior editor at WION. She's with us from Colombo this evening. Einar Thangen, he's a strategic affairs expert, joining us from Beijing on Skype. Jaidev Ranade, distinguished fellow at the IPCS, and Nihar Nayak, research fellow at the IDSA. Good evening to everyone. Padma, let me come to you first. You spoke to the Prime Minister today. You've spoken to various senior officials and lawmakers in Sri Lanka. How is Chinese Defence Minister's visit being seen, especially vis-a-vis India's concerns?
I've also been speaking to Sri Lankan journalists, Palki, and most of them tell me, apart from a few reports in the Sri Lankan media, there's not been much media attention. Some of the prominent media representatives tell me that this visit was not unplanned, as it seems in the media, not only the Indian media, but also in many other sections of the Western media, that the visit was very much planned. It's a very routine visit. And they also point out to me that simultaneously, the Indian Vice Navy chief is also in Sri Lanka, which is actually a
Right, we'll try and reconnect with Padma there. But Einar Thangen, China is clearly making a concerted effort to widen its footprint in the region. How important a link is Sri Lanka to those plans?
Sri Lanka is a very important port in terms of the OBOR, One Belt, One Road, or as they say in China, the Belt and Road Initiative. This is something that has been going on for quite some time. Unfortunately, one of the side effects is that it can look like there is a competition for regional influence. And this is what is occurring between China and India today. You see a lot of investment by China. There's already to Nepal over $8 billion. If you contrast that with India, in 2017 they only had about less than 350 million. So this is, in some sense, a competition of the purse, and in other sense, a competition to increase economic activity. And India has a choice. They can either say, look, we want to be part of this, or they can say, we don't want to be. If they don't, India just chooses not to be part of this, it's going to be testy.
Right. Jaidev Ranade, a Global Times post today said, and I'm quoting, India cannot prevent the growth of President Xi Jinping's initiatives and should join them, else it will end up watching China's expanding international influence. Is that how things stand?
To other Global Times articles and from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, saying that India needs to get on board if the One Belt, One Road is to be a success. And I think that is a more realistic appraisal. It's not a question of India wanting to stand aside and let this happen. We are not in competition, I don't think, for trying to retard the growth of Chinese influence. But having said that, let me make a couple of points here. Firstly, Chun Wan-Chan's visit to Sri Lanka at this time comes at a time when the Hambantota port has become a very controversial issue between Sri Lanka and China. Sirisena has been to China to try and resolve the question of interest debt repayments. China has rebuffed him. Now there is a popular agitation over Hambantota, which is an economically unviable port, and I think that will be one of the top items on Chun Wan-Chan's agenda. Second, in his 5-member delegation, we also have Su Chi-chuan, who is the Deputy Commander of the PLA Navy, recently appointed. He was the former commander of the East Sea. Prior to that, he was in the South Sea Fleet. So he brings with him a lot of knowledge about the South China Sea, about the Indian Ocean, about China's interests there, and the maritime Silk Route. And he has visited Sri Lanka earlier also. I think it was 2011 or 2012. So this visit is centered, in my view, on the pushing ahead or the advancing of the maritime Silk Route by Xi Jinping. And as I think one of your panelists referred to economic incentives being given, sure, China has given a lot of economic assistance to Sri Lanka and to the former president of Sri Lanka, as is well known. So I think it is an attempt by China to expand its influence, and it is not necessarily a very benign influence. There are sharp edges in it, and India will naturally be vigilant.
Padma, we lost the link with you. You were telling us about what you've picked up on the ground, and Mr. Ranade here says there's no race really between India and China. Is that the sense you get on the ground in Colombo?
Yes, Palki, what I said earlier was the fact that the Sri Lankan media, leading members of the Sri Lankan media, say that this was not an unplanned visit, as is popularly being reported in the media. It was very much a planned visit. And what the Sri Lankan media members also point out to me is that currently the Deputy Indian Naval Chief is also on a similar visit to Sri Lanka. But I wanted to go back to what Professor Ranade was saying earlier, and I agree with him in part. What he was saying is that, nobody here in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, where I am right now, is looking at this as a question of competition between the big neighbor India and China. I think, obviously being in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankans want India and China to respect their sovereignty. And even if India, but there is, and as you said earlier, I spoke to the Prime Minister today in an exclusive interview for World is One News, WION, which we will be airing very soon. And he did say to me, and I can give that away also, that, this is a routine visit and there is nothing really to be excited about it's nothing out of the ordinary. Having said that, Professor Ranade did mention about the competition between the two countries. I completely agree with Professor Ranade. I think what India should be doing and is doing in part, for instance, in Trincomalee, is, also finding niches and finding stakes where it can participate in the development of Sri Lanka. I would like to emphasize that from the Sri Lankan point of view, any involvement of outside powers must include the development or primarily focus on the development of Sri Lanka and not on the big power game that is going on in the Indian Ocean region.
Professor Ranade, how does India match China's growing influence and the kind of investments we've seen recently in Sri Lanka?
Well, it's not a dollar-for-dollar competition at all. And I think your correspondent there was absolutely correct. There are a lot of political linkages that we have with Sri Lanka, historical and contemporary political linkages. There are a lot of lot of assistance that we have been giving to each other. And one of the central pillars of India's foreign policy has been, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Sri Lanka, has been the development of that country and benefit to its people. So I think that is our strength, and that is what our central objective is. It is not to try and give aid to Sri Lanka, put it under debt, and then convert that debt into equity and take over chunks of Sri Lankan real estate, which is what China is doing. So I think we are not looking at it from that point of view. We are looking at it as how we can assist the people and the country to benefit.
Mr. Thangan, some have called it the quadrilateral strategy of China, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. Others say that Beijing is laying a debt trap for Colombo to establish its regional dominance. How does China respond to such charges?
Well, I can't speak for the Chinese government. I can tell you that the One Belt and Road Initiative is absolutely essential. It's one of the core economic strategies that China has been pursuing for quite some time. This is not a surprise. And of course, the land and sea routes go through these areas. And as I said, this is not necessarily going to be a smooth transition. The question is, how does India respond to this? Saying that China is trying to buy up these areas and things like that, I think, is a little naive. What we have in these situations are economic business calculations that went awry. They were not able to deliver in terms of managing the port. They ran out of money in Sri Lanka. And they were not able to deliver very smoothly yet on this economic development zone, which was key to making the port viable. So these are the kind of things that China is going to have to contend with, not only in Colombo and Sri Lanka, not only in Nepal, Pakistan, and everywhere else, but everywhere that the Silk Road goes. So they need to develop a much finer hand in how to anticipate these problems, how to integrate a little bit more carefully with the economic, political, and cultural realities of these very, very different countries and their linguistics. So this is a very important area that China has to learn. I think it would be great if China and India could look for a prosperous road together. There's a lot of uncertainty about where the U.S. is going under Donald Trump. There's a lot of uncertainty about multilateralism. And the question is, where does India see its best chance of not only helping itself, but also its neighbors?
Padma, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, sorry, I have a lot to say because I'm sitting here in Colombo. The first thing I'd like to say is I add on to what Professor Ranade said. There is a big difference which we may not and should not forget between India and China. We are culturally, historically, and linguistically linked to the Sri Lankans. China is not. The second thing is that there is a very visible sprawl of Chinese influence, if you like, at least in Colombo, and I will be traveling in a couple of days across the country, including to Hambantota, which is in the eye of the storm right now as far as India and China are concerned. And I can tell you only this, speaking to ordinary Sri Lankans, much worried about also the cultural influence, which is the advantage and the upper hand that India has. Having said that, I'd also like to say that I think that, given the fact that we have a majority government in India, which was not it was not like that in the past. In the previous government was a coalition government and was under strong pressure from Tamil Nadu. We don't have that situation today. So I, as an Indian myself, and as someone who has covered Sri Lanka for 30 years, would like to see greater participation of India based on that mutuality and based on that common linguistic and cultural tradition. And I very much hope, and I am optimistic that it will come from the current government in India.
Right, absolutely. Padma, thanks very much. I'm going to let you go at this point, and we're waiting, of course, for your interview with the Sri Lankan Prime Minister to play here on WION. Thank you very much for joining us here. I request the other guests to stay as we talk about Nepal. A similar scenario could well play out in Nepal, where some days ago, China and Nepal held their first joint army drills. Such drills are now common among countries, but many in India see it as the start of Beijing's effort to weaken the strong institutional ties between the Nepali and Indian armies. China is offering Nepal arms and equipment and has proposed to set up an armed police college. And as with Sri Lanka, Nepal is also being offered Chinese help in building infrastructure. China's inroads into Nepal are very, very clear now. The current Chinese investment in various projects is estimated at around $500 million. This is being substantially ramped up with a loan of $215 million for the Pokhara airport. The Lumbini airport project will cost another $100 million, and scores of other infrastructure projects are being discussed between the two countries. Nihar Nayak, a research fellow at the IDSA, has been patiently listening to this discussion on gravitas. I'm going to come to you, Nihar, now. You research China's soft power in Nepal. Why do you think Beijing is so keen on investing in a small Himalayan nation that has traditionally turned to India for support?
Hello.
Yes, Mr. Naik.
Hello.
Can you hear me now?
Hello.
Right. We'll try and fix the link there with Mr. Naik. But Jaideep Ranade, if I could come to you, institutional ties between the Indian and Nepalese armies are very strong and very old. Is the Chinese defense minister's visit an attempt to explore chinks there? Can this be seen in that context?
Well, I wouldn't, I'm not aware of any chinks in the India-Nepal military-to-military relationship. But certainly what China is trying to do is trying to get a toe in through the door. And they have offered direct military assistance, ignoring the requests of the Nepal Defense Ministry and Foreign Ministry to channel aid through them. And they have dealt directly with the Nepal army in the past. But this time, this visit by Chan Wan-chuan, let me also mention that this is probably his farewell visit, because he's 68 years old. He's going to retire at the 19th Party Congress, so or maybe earlier. So this is like a farewell visit, but certainly it's an important visit because he comes shortly before Prachanda travels to Beijing, and he's going to discuss a lot of issues. As far as Nepal is concerned, it's been labeled a friend by China under its new peripheral diplomacy concept. And they have promised it a lot of benefit, a lot of assistance. But I don't think it's something that India gets or is particularly worried about. Of course, we don't want them on our doorstep. But the links between Nepal and India, links through the pensioners, links through the Nepalese citizens, crores of them who work here, who are married here, who have property here, I think those are bonds that cannot be broken or in fact even weakened to any significant extent. So China will continue to try and bring Nepal within its fold. I think with Prachanda and the Oli and people like that, they will expect some help from them, but it will be a very uphill task for them.
Right. Mr. Naik, I'm told you're back with us, and the question I wanted to ask you was this: what is behind China's newfound love for Nepal? They're pouring millions of dollars into Nepal for various projects.
Yes. Look, one is obviously, China has been, slightly changed its foreign policy towards Nepal in post-monarchy period. And since then, Nepal has been sending high-level political delegations to Nepal to assess the political situation there and get the reassurance from the Nepal establishment that Nepal follows the One China policy. While following this policy, China also witnessed Nepal has been actually passing through a political transition, and it has been witnessing political instability for the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, if you will see, the 9 prime minister has been changed in Nepal, and that has been a major concern for Nepal, for China in Nepal, and that is the reason that the formal relationship between Nepal and China, which was at the state-to-state level, has been diversified to people's level and the institutional level. And the 3 institutions Chinese at this moment is focusing on in Nepal. One, the first target was the Nepal Armed Police, which is bordering Nepal and China border. And second is the Nepal bureaucracy. And the third and the last one is the Nepal Army, which is the most important institution at this moment and the most stable institution at this moment in Nepal as far as Nepal security and integrity is concerned. And that is where the defense minister is visiting when basically there is a public perception, growing public perception in Nepal that it is the Nepal army which can emerge as a savior in this kind of political turmoil going in Nepal. If you will see recently, not only this Chinese defense minister, last week Sri Lankan army chief visited. Presently US Pacific Command chief, he he is also in Kathmandu. Then army, Nepal China defense minister will be there, followed by Indian army chief will be there. So that means the Nepal army gradually emerging as a powerhouse in Nepal in future. And the fourth important point is here, there is a differences of opinion within Nepal army, particularly in the top rank leaders and the second rank leaders, that they should go and enhance the cooperation, military cooperation with China. And because of this, and another thing is the OBER. As Mr. Ranade pointed out, OBER has been, if you'll see, the visit will be covering three countries, Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bangladesh. And if you'll see the commonality in these three countries, all these three countries has been upgraded to strategic partnership from the Chinese point of view.
By China.
And they are also trying to pushing for the OBER in all these three countries.
All right, Mr. Tangin, I want to bring you in here. India's unhappiness vis-a-vis these developments is no secret. And some in India say that, you know, India and US troops are having military drills in the border region, in the region bordering Tibet, and China is nervous, and all this talk of business as usual of investments into Nepal may be all right, but this is just the fig leaf. Basically, China wants to strengthen its stronghold here, and it's nervous at the growing military presence.
Well, I think it's wrong to characterize this as some sort of foray in strengthening anything. If anything, you have impoverished countries that have been bordering India for quite some time. They have not made economic progress. It is they who have been very interested in Chinese money, investment. They want all the things that China has achieved. And that depends on investment in infrastructure, the kind of things that has been available to everybody. I think instead of concentrating on this as a regional play, India and China should look at this as they do. They sit on the board of the AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This is an opportunity to work together. And it's unfortunate that people still see this as some sort of territorial rivalry. Yes, China is unhappy when it sees the US and India cooperating on military drills on its border. I think if it's the other way around, I think India would be unhappy. But instead of seeing threats and fear, it's time that people see the opportunities and hope.
Well, on that optimistic note, see the opportunities and not the competition here. We're going to wrap this up, this edition of Gravitas. Ainar Tangin, Nihar Naik, Jaydev Ranade. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. That's it then on Gravitas this Monday. We're leaving you with something very special. We've all grown up watching and listening to the Backstreet Boys. Now we have the Backhand Boys. Take a look at this.
Everybody needs a little time away. I've heard her say from each other. Even lovers need a holiday. Far away from each other. Hold me now. It's hard for me to say I'm sorry. I just want you to know. Hold me now. I really want to tell you I'm sorry. I could never let you go.